Hello and welcome to the Allplane Podcast, where we talk about commercial aviation in the company of those expert professionals that are working day and night to define the future of this industry. But first of all, let me repeat my usual reminder and my invitation to visit our website, Allplane.tv. That is ALLPLANE.TV. You will find lots of interesting aviation content in there. Now, continuing with our series of interviews with leading sustainable aviation entrepreneurs, today on this episode we will talk about a very interesting aircraft making project from France that comes with a unique twist. David Gallezot is reviving a classical French aviation brand, but with the technologies of the 21st century. Avions Mauboussin, such is the name of David's venture, is in a way bridging the past and the future of the French aviation industry. Mauboussin was a French aircraft designer that was active in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. He made airplanes that were designed to make flying affordable and accessible. And this is a goal that is shared by the Avions Mauboussin of our day, which is actually a brand new company based in eastern France. Avions Mauboussin has recently unveiled a couple of very interesting hybrid aircraft concepts for local and regional air transport. But like always, before I say anything else, I think the best is that we hear it all directly from the founder of Avions Mauboussin, David Gazellot, who will also be able to give us a masterclass on the history of French aircraft manufacturing. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello, Michael. I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I read with a lot of interest about your project just a few days ago because you announced the first aircraft concepts that you are working on. And I think it would be great if on this podcast we could discuss what your company is about and the very interesting historical roots of your company and ultimately what is the goal of Avions Mauboussin for the coming years. Shall we maybe start with a little bit of your background? So you are based in France and you relaunched in 2017 a historical French aircraft making brand called Avions Mauboussin. I have to confess that I never heard about it before, but I went to the Wikipedia when I heard the name and yeah, it's a very interesting story from the late 1920s and 1930s that went on until right after the Second World War. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and how did you come up with this project?
Well, I come from an engineering background. I made my studies in aeronautical engineering 25 years ago in France, in École Polytechnique and in Supaéro then. And after that, I started my career with Thales. I designed a number of aircraft cockpits. Amongst them, we had the Nimrod maritime patrol aircraft that did not go ultimately into service. The Nimrod 2000 program was cancelled a few years ago. Then I went on to design the A380 cockpit and a number of other helicopters and also some research programs within Thales. And after that, I went to a small startup company that intended to do one of the many successors, the DC-3. So that would have been a bush plane with like 19 seats, twin turboprop. That looks very much like the Cessna Sky Courier that is in flight test right now, but that was 10 years ago. And then I went on to be a consulting engineer in regulations, aeronautical regulations, of course, airworthiness and certifications, company approval, etc. since 10 years now. And at some point, I wanted to create a new line of aircraft. So as I am very fond of historical aviation, I did restore planes for my school, Supaéro, in parallel to my studies there. So now there are two planes at the entrance of the school. One is a MiG-15 and the other one is a Mirage fighter. So Mr. Gurevich, one of the famous Gurevich brothers that designed the MiG, actually made his engineering studies together with Marcel Dassault at the school that was not yet named Supaéro, but And that was right before World War World War One. And as a matter of celebrating these two pioneers of aviation, we bought a MiG-15 and we restored it, and we restored also the Mirage that has been at the entrance of the school for many years, and that has gone very decrepit over time.
Yeah. Quite impressive. I mean, how did you get a MiG-15 from where?
Actually, can't remember precisely if it was Slovakia or the Czech Republic. So one of the Eastern European. That was in 1995, quite a long time ago now.
Wow.
And it took us 2 years with a group of students to restore it to static display only. It's not flying. And to put it on display, that is, at the entrance of the school.
And the Mirage, what model is it?
It's a Mirage 3A. So one of the, I think, less than 10, I think it was 9 pre-prototype for the Mirage fighters. So that's the 3A model.
Very interesting. One interesting thing here is you are actually linking the past and the future, because basically the new aircraft that you are working on at Avions Mauboussin, it's already being designed with your mind on the new types of propulsion that are expected to become the norm in coming years.
Yes, the idea of recreating a company called Avions Mauboussin also comes from the historical background, because 20 years ago I was working as a volunteer in a museum, and I discovered a real, I would say, vintage Mauboussin of 1933 that was, let's say, sitting forgotten at the back of a hangar, and I restored it, and that's where I learned about the Mauboussin family and the Mauboussin planes of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I intended to, let's say, to connect this French historical brand with the technology of the 21st century, that is mostly electric hybrid propulsion. At that time, I didn't thought about hydrogen. That came a bit later on. In order to have efficient, clean, comfortable planes flying now.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting point, because you are working in a company that it's a newly created company, if I understand correctly, but it recovers a name that, as you mentioned, was being used by a French company founded in 1928, and it had most of its production during the 1930s. It later, the brand disappeared because it got acquired by another company after the war. Can you tell us a bit more about this story? Because there are quite a few projects now working on electric aviation and new aircraft, but few of them have this sort of connection to the past. So I think it's very interesting if you could give us a bit of background of who Mauboussin was and what were the achievements that he got.
Pierre Mauboussin was a member of the Mauboussin family, of course, that owned the jewelry, which is still today better known than Avions Mauboussin. And at some point, he got interested, very, very much interested in aviation. He created the Avions Mauboussin, the first Avions Mauboussin company in 1928. He hired an engineer called Louis Perret, who had already made a number of designs. And together they designed their first plane, which was the PM-10, P for Perret and M for Mauboussin, of course. And that was a single-seater with a very long, thin wing. Today we would say a glider wing. And a very small engine, because it was only 34 horsepower. The idea that Pierre Mauboussin had at the time is that he could make aviation more affordable by reducing the installed power. The reason that the power meant cost, because the plane had to be bought. So a more powerful engine would be, of course, more costly than a less powerful one. And also for operations, because the fuel consumption would be higher. And he worked on the aerodynamic efficiency and on the lightness of the structure. So he used very thin and efficient wings, and also light structures made out of wood. Wood was not uncommon in that time, of course, but it was being progressively replaced with metal, especially for commercial and military aviation. And from this first model, they moved to a second model, which was with the same architecture, only it had 2 seats. So it was the PM11. And a number of, record flights were made with the PM11. One of them was a flight from Paris to Madagascar, so all the way to Madagascar and back by a single pilot pioneer called René Lefebvre. And the same pilot later on flew all the way to Saigon in the French Indochina of the time, again alone in the PM11. And after that, they moved on to a slightly different design, which was a 2-seater in tandem open cockpit with a low wing. The first 2 models had high wings, but it's exactly the same platform and the same flight controls. That is flaprons at the time for the called the PM12, which was the next model in their line. And that aircraft started to be built in 2 numbers. The first ones were built, as far as you know, the single prototypes with no production. So the PM12 started to be manufactured, and there were a number of variants, and with several different engines from 45 to 75 horsepower, with Samsung engines and also a British engine called the Pobjoy. And that's where they started to add an industrial footprint to what had been already only a design office. The very first Mauboussin were actually produced under contract by Zodiac and by Breguet.
Are they the same Zodiac that, well, I think it was acquired recently by Safran, I think, but it's the same Zodiac that was doing aircraft interiors and seats and all sort of aerospace equipment?
Well, a long time ago, Zodiac made airplanes, but also mostly made airships, because the very first aeronautical product of the Zodiac company was airships in the late 19th century. After that, they went on to manufacture a number of planes. They did not build a great number of them, and I don't think they designed very, very few heavier than air and airplanes or aircraft. And yes, they did produce then a lot of different things. And with a long history of mergers and acquisitions, it became the Zodiac Group with lots of products, including electrical systems, seats, etc. That was acquired a few years ago by Safran.
And who was the intended audience or public or market that Mauboussin was aiming for with these planes?
Well, at that time, the aviation was mostly reserved for people with a fair amount of money because it was expensive. So the idea of Pierre Mauboussin was to make it more affordable. And we had in France a movement called Popular Aviation in the middle of the 30s that created a number of flying clubs, and that started the production of planes by the state or paid for by the state and then lent to the flying clubs in a non-for-profit mode. I think Pierre Mauboussin was a precursor to that because he started making affordable airplane before the middle of the 30s.
But so it was general aviation. So it was people that would be flying themselves those planes.
Yes. Actually, Mauboussin designed single-seaters, 2-seaters, and we have some traces of 4-seaters and transport plane, or transport being 6 or 8 seats maximum. But that's only the prototypes or mock-ups, but no actual. Not even prototypes. Mock-ups or drawings, but not even actual prototypes. He also designed a racer called the Mauboussin 200, a single-seater racer at the end of the 30s. And it's not until after the World War II that he designed bigger planes, biggest one being the CM100, which was actually a combat glider. So inspired by the Orsa and other combat gliders, the Waco of World War II, he designed a military glider. Actually, it was only one prototype, and then the prototype was fitted with motors. So it became some kind of a motor glider or airplane, simply. and it was also fitted with turbojets. So at the end of the day, the CM100 was an airplane with 2 piston engines and 2 turbojets.
And what happened to Avions Mauboussin? Most of his work was during the 30s, and then came the war. What happened after the war? Because I think the brand basically disappeared after, like in the 1940s, right?
Well, yes, mostly the name Avions Mauboussin was used prior to World War II. And after World War II, Pierre Mauboussin was associated with 2 people. Well, actually, Avions Mauboussin, lacking a plant, so started to have his airplane built by Zodiac and Breguet. And then he got into a partnership with a company called Fouga. And Mr. Fouga and his company were making mostly rail stock in southern France. And they together converted a plant that was in Aire-sur-Adour, so in the Landes department, in southwestern France, to actually produce the Mauboussin PM or M12 and the derivatives called the 121, 22, 23, etc. The name of the product line at that time, the 2-seater, was the Corsair, and they built around 100 airplanes before the war.
Before the war.
Before the war. So that's still under the name Mauboussin. But after the war, the brand name that was used was Fouga. And together with Mr. Fouga, Pierre Mauboussin associated with an engineer from Toulouse who was working before that for De Voitine, the name of Robert Castello. And Robert Castello was the designer of airplane, like the De Voitine 520 fighter, but he also designed gliders on his free time. And he designed and built gliders in the experimental amateur built category in the popular aviation movement. And at the end of the war, they associated together to create a new line of aircraft that was now called the CM for Castel and Mauboussin, like the very first planes of Pierre Mauboussin were PM, P for Perret, and M for Mauboussin. And so they made a number of gliders together, CM7, CM8, mostly single-seater gliders, under the name Fouga, because that was the name they were using, and the Mauboussin was only, still a great role, of course, was only the designer. So
sorry, I was saying Fouga is famous for the Fouga Magister, right? It's a jet trainer aircraft. There are still some around. Actually, I did a podcast a few months ago with a company, well, the manager of a company in Belgium, that they still operate a Fouga for some experiential flights. You can have they have some vintage aircraft that you can still fly as a treat, and one of them is a Fouga Magister. So, sorry, just I was just going to make a quick parenthesis to introduce the Fouga brand, which is, I don't know what happened later to Fouga. Is acquired by someone else?
Yes, because practically the Fouga Magister is a glider with 2 turbojets. The aerodynamic formula one of a glider, and that evolved from a number of previous turbojet-powered gliders made by Pierre Mauboussin, Robert Castello, and Robert Zidlowski, who is the founder of Turbomeca. So, who is located in southwestern France. So there's a regional connection, I would say. So they started with basically powered gliders together, and the best known design of that series is it's a Magister, and it's also notable because it is their first metal product. Prior to that, they only did wooden airframes, so meaning wooden airplanes and wooden gliders. And the Magister was proposed in a tender by the French government for military trainers, and he won against a very famous company of the time, Morin Saulnier, who was actually offering a very similar design to the tender. And so Fouga had won the competition, but they lacked the industrial footprint to produce, say, 1,000 Magister. The order for the French government, the first one, was several hundreds units, and they didn't have the facility to actually produce that, so they were bought by another company called Potez. So
So Potez is a very old company that was created right after World War I by Henri Potez, who, by the way, was also in the same school and then later associated with Marcel Dassault. So they were together in the École Supérieure d'Aéronautique prior to World War I. And during the war, they built a number of planes and propellers together and then separately. So Potez I think it was 1955, when the Magister was ready for production, acquired the assets of Fuga, and the company changed the name, and it was Potez Air Fuga. And it worked under that name until the end of the 60s. And they built ultimately around 1,000 Magister, which were also built under license by Heinkel in Germany, and a handful were manufactured in Israel as a ready-to-assemble kits or completely produced out there. Potez itself had some, let's say, economic difficulties in the beginning of the 70s, and they were purchased by Aerospatiale, who was the big government-owned aeronautical company of the time. They were doing Concorde and Caravelle and starting to work on Airbus at the time, and they bought out Potez, who had run into some difficult times.
And then Aerospatiale became one of the, then I think EADS and then Airbus, well, basically what is now Airbus, right? So,
yes, so we can say that Mauboussin, through a number of adventures, is one of the many routes of Airbus today.
Yeah, it's amazing, all these trees, genealogic trees of the aerospace companies, and how also fascinating how France, still has today one of the world's largest aerospace industries, but that comes from a very, very long tradition. And in part, you are tracing back, recovering the name of Avions Mauboussin. So you chose Mauboussin because you had come across this old airframe in a museum.
Yes, there was this airframe that was, let's say, waiting for somebody to take care of it. So I restored it partially, and I also went to a number of museums to collect information, old photographs and data, and also went to meet some other Mauboussin aficionados, I would say. There are only, let's say, less than 10 Mauboussin still flying today. All of them, as far as I know, are in France. And when I decided I wanted to create a company about aviation, I thought it would be interesting to recreate Avions Mauboussin with the same spirit of using efficient aerodynamics and lightweight structures and as little power as necessary to fly in order to confront to the challenges of the 21st century, which is reduction of the carbon emissions, of the noise, and all of the pollution and nuisance of aviation. So the objective is slightly different from what it was almost a century ago, but the idea is also for efficient aviation.
Yeah, actually, when you mentioned this historical period 100 years ago, one thing that I find quite striking is that I've got this feeling that we are now entering an era where there is all this entrepreneurial activity around aviation, trying new concepts, trying new ideas, a little bit like what had happened 100 years ago when there were plenty of entrepreneurs that were trying different approaches to develop something that was very new at the time. You look at those planes of that time and you see all these very small and quite fragile airframes that, however, were quickly evolving. Do you see this parallel as well? This effervescence we have now with, I think there's about, I read a report, I think from consultancy firm. Do you see any parallels between the era we are entering now in aviation, where many entrepreneurs are developing new concepts with new technologies? Many of these concepts are of quite small scale at the moment. So we are talking about small planes that have some limitations because the battery technology, for example, still needs to progress further. But in a way, it resembles what we were seeing about 100 years ago, where there were plenty of entrepreneurs also trying new concepts and developing planes that putting the basis of what later became a huge industry. I don't know if that's the right comparison. Of course, aviation has, there are big groups and there are big operators, but I'm seeing now lots of startup projects, actually, which is something that a few years ago might have been a lot more unthinkable. I mean, starting a plane company is a huge challenge technologically, financially. What's your view on this?
It's very true that we could see some kind of parallel or inspiration that we have today a number of people or significant number of people launching new projects with electric or hybrid or even conventional, but with a reduction in fuel consumption projects. A lot of them are, I would say, quite small, and it looks like let's say late 19th century or prior to World War One, before the aeronautical industry actually became an industry, because it was a very, we say that in French, artisanal. So I think they were craftsmen. They were not industrialists. They were craftsmen, and they were building one or two or three airplanes or a dozen at a time. And of course, it all took an industrial size and thousands of planes produced during World War One. So today we have a lot of interesting projects, a lot of small or not so small companies, because the project size goes from a few million euros, I would say, to companies that have already achieved financing of 500 million euros. And all of that happens in parallel to having very big companies like Airbus, Boeing, and the creativity is rather on the side of the smaller companies, even if they are sometimes associated with the bigger ones. So, and also what is interesting is that we have a lot of ideas to address new needs, new usage for aviation, like urban air mobility, like regional air mobility, like we do in Avions Mauboussin. So lots of new uses for the planes, not only new technology, new applications, and also a new way to handle air travel to make it easier, because air travel has become a bit complicated with all the airports, the safety or the security measures, and it's maybe it has lost a bit of its appeal because it's become inconvenient. It's very popular, it's very practical, it's a massive transportation of people with billions of people traveling every year, at least until last year. But the same, so simple as let's say not far away air transport has been lost in the process, and it's interesting to see how we can recreate that. I mean, I wouldn't say that you have an airfield next door, but that would be almost like that, in order to fly out of your location and go exactly where you want to go, in a comfortable, simple, and responsible way.
Yeah, and actually, you are part of this new paradigm in the industry. Tell me a bit more about Avions Mauboussin of the 2020. So, who else is working on this project with you? Is it a new company with private investors? And what is your time horizon for your aircraft development? You recently, and also would like to touch upon the two models that you recently presented, because you are taking a bit of a two-stage approach, right? So you have the first is a two-seater thing, right? And then you are planning to launch a larger aircraft in a few years' time, in 2024, right?
Yes, so the founders of the company, besides myself, are a small group of aviation professionals. We have the former executive director of EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency. We have a specialist for propulsion with a background in turbo machinery, but more recently he also worked on hybrid electric and hybrid propulsions. We have also somebody coming from the former design office of Dassault Aviation with lots of experience in designing fighters, airliners, and even a space shuttle. It's a bit far away from what we are doing now, but it's always interesting. And we have, so these are the founders of the new Avions Mauboussin company, besides me. The team today includes about 10 people.
We have engineers and we have trainees working on the design of the first airplane in the new Avions Mauboussin range in Belfort, in eastern France. So we have taken, I would say, a rather engineering or conservative approach where we want to demonstrate our ideas on a two-seater airplane, and then we can move on to a bigger, more ambitious project, which will be the Alcyon with 6 seats. So the idea is that we believe that we can propose or we can offer to small airlines or to individual operators or private operators like company shuttle, a means of transportation to go directly from where you want to go to where you are to where you want to go. So by having an airplane or a family of airplanes that are able to land almost anywhere. We keep a fixed wing, so it's not a rotary wing, it's not a vertical takeoff and landing type of transportation, because for energetic efficiency reasons, we do very much like the fixed wing with a good gliding ratio that is capable of transporting people or things with a minimum amount of energy. And in order to achieve that, we have a very short takeoff and landing distances, very low landing and takeoff speeds, in order to land, of course, on airfields, airports, but also on ultralight bases, and in order to be able to develop also a new number of let's say, small airfields. So we call them air park. So an air park is a location where you can land. It's only 300 meters long, and it can be installed almost anywhere. For example, if you have a holiday house with a big enough lawn, you can land directly on the lawn of your holiday house. Or if you have a plant and you need immediate access for the customers or for incoming goods or for urgent production parts, then you can land on the parking lot of the plant. You can still land on traditional airfields and airports.
I noticed that in your presentation, you highlight a lot this STOL aspect, short takeoff and landing of this aircraft. So far you have presented two models. One is a smaller one. It's called the Allplane. That's the one that it looks very cool, very sleek. Then you have the other one, which looks a lot more futuristic, to put it some way.
The second one is called Alcyon.
Alcyon. It has this very interesting concept with propellers on the tips of the wings. They have like two sets of propellers on each wing. So I'm going to post photos of this on the show notes, of course. This aircraft, can you tell me a bit more about the powertrain of both these aircraft? So they are both going to have a hybrid propulsion. You are working on hybrid electric with batteries and also with hydrogen, right? So you are looking at both.
Yes. So the ultimate goal is to use hydrogen because it will provide a clean fuel for aircraft that is compatible with the power we need to have on board the aircraft to have short takeoff and also a good cruise speed. So ultimately, our planes will rely on hydrogen for the source of energy, but we are realistic engineers, and we know this will not happen until some years ahead of us. So Airbus has set a date of 2035 for a number of Airbuses running on hydrogen. We plan to be able to do things much quicker for small planes, but we know that in the meantime we will have to fly with some, let's say, carbon-based fuels like kerosene or avgas. We want to reduce the amount of that fuel that is used, and with all the negative consequences. So we have decided to go with first an hybrid thermal and electric drive that can be easily converted to hydrogen, or that can readily consume
hydrogen in addition to the traditional fuels. So our planes will fly first with what you call a plug-in hybrid drive. So much like a number of cars that are rolling in the streets right now. So the takeoff and landing will be made in electric mode, and the energy in that phase of flight will come from batteries, and the energy for the cruise phase will come from a petrol tank in the first step, and the second step that will be an hydrogen tank that will be converted into electricity to practically turn the propeller after that. Mm-hmm. And we intend also to give our airplane the capability to use the fuel that will be available where you land. Because if we want to keep our motto of landing almost anywhere or transporting people almost anywhere, we must be realistic. There will not be hydrogen for aviation everywhere until quite a number of years. So we will be offering not only a conversion to hydrogen, but that will be an addition of hydrogen as a fuel to our aircraft to the existing and already well distributed avgas and kerosene. And of course, we hope that our operators and pilot owners will burn hydrogen as often as they can find that at their, let's say, operating site. And we are working with airport operators to accelerate the distribution of hydrogen on airports. And our operators will be, and customers will still rely on traditional fuel whenever hydrogen has not yet been distributed.
Because who's going to be the expected final users of this, or the operators? Your product presentation as well, the regional aspect of connecting all this decentralized transport between different small communities, or even, as you mentioned, private homes that have enough space nearby. I'm assuming from this that an important part of the demand for this would be private users, perhaps with a broader user base than current general aviation. Do you anticipate also some commercial users here as air taxis? What is your business model based on?
Well, as things are changing, or let's say, or could be changing a lot into the use of small aviation or general aviation, we are working with a number of potential uses. You are right that we will address the pilot owner market for people who are flying for their own business or for their own pleasure. And we will also address the air taxi market, where small airlines will offer transportation services to people who need to travel, either for personal or for business reasons. And of course, Alcyon, with the 5 useful seats besides the pilot, is ideally sized for, let's say, entry-level business aviation, and that will be the most of its market. Alérion, on the other hand, with only 2 seats, including the pilot, will probably have a majority of private users, but we still see a market for transporting one single person to a urgent meeting directly where he needs to be there in an air taxi role as well. So that's a mix of private and commercial operations. And we intend, and we are already working together with either small airlines or small business aviation companies, or alternative means of organizing the transport, like internet platforms that are connecting aviation needs or aviation or transportation needs. I would say on the one hand you have transportation needs, on the other hand you have an airborne or regional mobility solution, and somebody has to connect them. So traditionally it's a little bit complicated. You have to phone to let's say an air taxi company or a small business plane company to reserve a plane. Obviously it has been improved by the digital technology. So now we can offer to connect the users or the people who need transportation with the means. Avions Mauboussin will not be an operator of airplanes. We do not intend to become an air taxi company or a small business airline.
We will be working with people who are knowledgeable in this activity in order to propose a better airplane than the one they have today, or an airplane that is capable of doing something that is not available today, like landing very short and still flying fast and farther away, because Alcyon, for example, has a range of 1,500 meters. Kilometers.
How much runway would it need?
So our goal is to be able to operate out of runways smaller than 300 meters. That will be, of course, that's not mandatory, where you can still land on a 2,000 runway with our planes if the objective of the transportation is to go to Charles de Gaulle or to Atlanta International Airport. Ours are airplanes. They are not ultralights, so they are allowed to land there. But you will also be able to land in a rural area or in a ultralight base or in big heliports. There are a number of heliports that actually have runways, like Issy-les-Moulineaux, for example, near Paris. It does have a 350 meters long runway, and it's 50 meter wide. So it could be called a STOL port, like an airport for short takeoff and landing planes. And it can be shared with, of course, helicopters or other kinds of rotary wing transport, like all the electrical urban eVTOL that people are putting on the market or people are studying right now. So it's perfectly compatible. Our regional air mobility is compatible with urban air mobility, and we can even connect the two on the same platform.
And it will need a paved surface. Can it land in a grass field, for example?
We're trying to keep the compatibility with grass fields because it's also one of our goals that we will not need to put to consume too much natural space or to create artificial land when creating a new operating platform for our airplanes. So our planes are small, they are lightweight, and they are designed to work also out of grass runways. That's better for the environment than concrete runway, and that's easier to install. And we even have some ideas to improve these grass runways without removing the grass and the capability to absorb rain, which is very important nowadays. So we would combine the, let's say, nature side of the grass runway with the permanent side of a concrete runway. The trouble with grass runways is that when it rains, they become soft and difficult to operate from. Mostly, that's the drawback they have compared to a concrete or tarmac runways or taxiways in general, operating surfaces. So we want to combine both so that we can have a very nice and green airfield for a very nice and green aircraft.
Where are you now with this project? What are the milestones that have been achieved already? And what are the next developments that we can expect?
So what we are doing now is we are validating the basic technologies for the two planes, like aerodynamics, structure, and propulsion. So we are building ground demonstrators, or let's say proof of concept, as they say, for the structures of the planes. Basically, we are building a static airframe, and we will do next year a static test of that airframe to validate the structure's point of view. We are creating a propulsion test bench right now to test and integrate the electric, then hybrid propulsion system, and it will be converted to hydrogen later on, of course. And we are right now validating the aerodynamics of the plane and mostly its key point, which is the STOL, so the short takeoff and landing. We are doing a wind tunnel test to make sure that we have the right lift and the right low stall speed that is required for a family of STOL planes. And all of that will be put into a practical use, I would say, with the first flight of Allplane, which we are preparing for 2022, and the first flight of Alcyon 1 year after that.
So 2022 and 2023 for the...
That's it.
for the
For
first
each run.
flight of our
Mhm.
prototypes.
Okay, for prototypes. And for commercial release?
We estimate that we will need 2 years after the first flight to certify the planes and be
Mhm.
ready to deliver production units to our customers. So that would be 2024 for Allerion and 2025 for Alcyon in the
Okay.
first version with hybrid propulsion, and 1 or 2 years after that for hydrogen, depending on the maturation of technology and also all the hydrogen economy, because
Yeah.
of course, we can still fly an hydrogen prototype. If we don't have hydrogen stations at airfields, it will be difficult to sell airplanes to paying customers without the complete system of hydrogen resupply available at a number of locations.
Mhm. You are based in Belfort, which is in the east of France, near the Swiss border. Are you planning to build your airplanes there as well? You build them yourselves, or you plan to outsource this to some OEM?
So our plan is to build the planes ourselves and to build there locally, so in Belfort, and also to use a number of local partners and resources as much as possible. For example, to lower the carbon footprint of the construction of the planes themselves. But we are also working with a number of companies from the US, for example, for avionics. We are working with companies of several European countries for different parts or materials. We have a quite wide supply chain now, and we hope that we'll be able to have a production facility ready, or let's say a first production facility or workshop for the prototypes at the end of next year in Belfort.
Very good. So before we wrap it up, if people want to learn more about Avions Mauboussin, where should they check it?
So for the moment, we have mostly a website. The website is avionsmauboussin.fr, very simply.
Mm-hmm.
And we have also a few pages and presence on the usual social networks like LinkedIn, like Facebook, like Instagram, where we put up some news from time to time.
Okay, yes, I'm going to put links on the show notes so that people can check for themselves and they can see these very cool looking airplanes that you are currently working on. It's been a great pleasure talking with you today and learning about this project that aims to link the past and the future of French aerospace industry. Well, looking forward to see a name with such a pedigree to the sky soon.
Thanks a lot, Michael, for hosting Avions Mauboussin and its airplanes project. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll keep you informed and everybody informed about our progress.
Hope so. Yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on the news coming out from Belfort. So thank you so much.
Thank you and goodbye.
And one more thing before you go. Remember, you can subscribe to the Allplane Podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and many other platforms. If you like this podcast, please do not hesitate to give it a good rating or to recommend it to a friend. See you soon.